Hello everyone, and welcome to a video I've been working on for a very long time. Monster Hunter World is one of my favorite video games of all time, and it's mainly thanks to the myriad of incredible creatures in the world. They're some of the most beautiful and well-made creatures in fiction, and the way they behave and act makes them feel like living, breathing animals. Couple that with some spectacular designs, intense fights, and awe-inspiring introductions, there's a lot to love about the monster roster and world. However, that doesn't mean they're all perfect. In fact, there's even a few monsters I actually despise, but there's a lot of different reasons for that. It could be lazy design, a lot of BS in a fight, artificial difficulty, or just uninteresting weapons or armor. So that's what I'll be doing for today, ranking all of the monsters in Monster Hunter World. This list will not include any Iceborne monsters, however, or else we'll be here all day. However, I will be doing a separate ranking video for Iceborne monsters sometime in the near future. This list is also just my personal thoughts and opinions. Your list probably differs, so be sure to let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments below. This video will also still be probably pretty long, so be sure to leave a like and come back if you need to. For now though, let's rank all 33 of the monsters from Monster Hunter World. Starting at number 33 is the Giratotus. It shouldn't surprise anyone this thing is at the bottom of the list. I've had actual rants about this creature. My friends can vouch for that. It's just so lazy. It has an uninteresting design, a boring fight, and it gets knocked over every 5 seconds. It's also more than a little similar to Levassiath, an equally crappy monster. The only saving grace for this scum-sucking mudfish is that its armor set doesn't actually look all that bad. Aside from that, this thing is a turd and a waste of a spot on the roster. At number 32 is Levassiath. This thing is Giratotus, but with lava instead of mud, and it's just as annoying and stupid to fight. It's uninteresting, and it suffers from all the annoying traits of literally every other Piscine wyvern in existence. It can harden its skin, so sharp weapon users will see their attacks bouncing left and right, and when there's so many cooler monsters in the Elder's Recess, why bother even going after this thing? Even the developers have admitted that this monster is hated by the players, and they had to create a special event quest where it literally throws up gems to get players to fight it. Plus, the armor isn't very cool. Overall, this thing is like Giratotus, just isn't interesting at all. Number 31 is the first Elder Dragon on this list, Zora Magdaros. What confuses me about this monster is that Capcom have nailed giant Elder Dragon fights before with Dia Morales, Dalamador, or Lao Shanlung. Zora is not such a monster. It's just boring. And its quests and the story are an absolute chore if you play solo like I did. They literally have to throw Nergigante into the fight to keep you invested. It does have a sense of grandeur the first time you fight it, but afterwards it's just really boring and not very engaging. Plus, there's never really a time in the game where you feel like you get a real proper look at it. It always looks like a giant volcanic blob. It was a good idea, but wasn't executed like it could have been. Number 30 is Uragon. This thing is literally Uragon, without the bombs and plastered with tar and bones. It even has the same calls. I'm not sure why this thing was included, honestly. They should have made it into an Uragon subspecies. Overall, it has a few cool attacks where it spins like a buzzsaw on the floor, but aside from that, it's just hideously ugly to look at, and not in a good way. The fight is fine, I guess, but nothing really sticks out as anything cool. It's just the ugliest brute wyvern ever made, and doesn't have enough redeeming features to me. Armor is pretty neat, however. At number 29 is everyone's favorite electric unicorn, Kieran. Who am I kidding? Everyone hates this stupid pony. It's too fast, its lightning attacks are insanely difficult to dodge, and it's way too hard to land hits on it using melee weapons. It's just... it's the definition of an annoying fight. Once you fight Kieran, unless you're a masochist, you're probably not going to want to ever fight it ever again. It's a ridiculous dodge fest. Unless you've spec'd into thunder resistance, it can be nearly impossible to survive. And I've always felt like the Kieran armor just looks really silly. It just isn't a fun fight. At number 28 is Great Gyros. This thing was actually below Zora for me at first, but he's grown on me very slightly. Great Gyros by itself doesn't have an awful design. It's basically a Komodo dragon mixed with a cobra, which on paper sounds really neat, but unfortunately it has more than a few major drawbacks. First is that it lives in the effluvia-covered area of the Rotten Vale. It can command its pack of smaller Gyros, which can harass the player left and right, and worst of all, its fangs cause paralysis, even with the smaller Gyros. Combine these three things, and the fight can get very annoying very quickly. On its own, Great Gyros isn't awful, just forgettable. However, its armor set is really cool and makes up for its failings a bit. Number 27 is another immensely annoying Elder Dragon, Kushala Daora. Kushala has a reputation for sure, and you likely don't enjoy getting knocked around the arena like a pinball by Kushala's constant tornado spam. On top of that, this thing just refuses to ever land. It's frustrating fighting Kushala with melee weapons, as it's airborne more often than not. When a fight becomes more about flint-shotting a monster into the ground instead of being a dance of blades and claws, the fight is no longer fun, it's just a chore. That's what fighting Kushala feels like, a chore. Its wind effects are annoying, the dragon never lands, and it's overall really frustrating. On the good side, however, its armor is pretty cool, and the actual design of the monster looks really cool. It just isn't helped that the fight is just so annoying. Number 26 is Lunastra. This thing is the definition of artificial difficulty, and it's mainly due to the ridiculous blue flames this dragon litters all over the ground. Doesn't matter if you're fighting it in high rank with master rank armor, the flames deal the same amount of damage. On top of that, it deals constant fire blight and attacks spam left and right with blinding speed. On top of that, similar to Wrathion, this thing will just run back and forth, plowing any hunters in front of it and causing a very frustrating amount of missed hits. The only thing Lunastra has going for it is that I think its mating ritual with Teostra looks pretty cool, and it gets an awesome cutscene. Aside from that, this thing is a nightmare. Number 25, and I'm sorry to all of you, is the bestest boy, Doradogama. It's not that I don't love everyone's favorite chunky boy, it's just not a very memorable fight. It's always in the background and never really feels like a threat. Then again, it also wasn't really designed to. Honestly, I never fight this thing. It just feels wrong. There's really nothing much else to say about Doradogama. It's not a bad design and not a bad fight, it just sort of falls by the wayside and doesn't really ever make an impact. I am sorry, goodest boy. At number 24 is Black Diablos. Much like Lunastra, Black Diablos takes the more annoying aspects of Diablos and turns it up to 11. More charging spam, more roaring, more digging and exploding out of the ground, tougher armor, more often enraged, it's just a pain. While it's definitely one of the most intimidating monsters in the roster, it just suffers from an incredibly annoying fight. Though its turf war with regular Diablos is really cool, and it can occasionally be a fun challenge if you're with the right team. Number 23 is the Azure Rathalos. While the normal Rathalos can be a difficult fight on its own, it remains a fair challenge. Azure Rathalos, on the other hand, is not. It's Rathalos, except constantly airborne, and this can make him an infuriating monster to fight with for a melee weapon user like myself. The fireballs it emits are also more powerful, and while on paper this sounds like a more challenging fight, it ends up becoming tedious and frustrating. Plus its weapons and armor are just blue reskins of regular Rathalos armor. Number 22 is the first monster players encounter, the Great Jagras. I don't hate Great Jagras, it's just such a pitiful and powerless monster. Filling in the role of the Great Jaggy or the Velocidrome from previous games, Great Jagras is a nearly harmless fanged wyvern. The fight is immensely easy, and fainting to this monster only happens if you do it on purpose, or if you get up to get yourself a sandwich before returning to the fight. Even in that situation, you still might only lose half a health bar. The hunting habits of the Jagras are an interesting mechanic, as the Jagras will go and swallow prey in the middle of a fight before using its engorged stomach as a weapon. It's a neat feature, but overall, the Jagras is left in the dust very early in the game, and is all but forgotten once in Master Rank. Number 21 is the Kulu Yaku. The Kulu Yaku is a nice intro monster to the game. The first bird wyvern players face, it's not much of a challenge, though it introduces players to environmental use. When fighting, the Kulu will sometimes dig up rocks to use as a defense for its front. In lower tier, this will cause sharp weapons to bounce, and it can use this rock as a projectile when done with it. It's a nice little tutorial mechanic built into the monster. However, as much as I like its design, and even its armor appearance, at the end of the day, this monster is just a tutorial. However, I don't despise it, I just wish it was more relevant once in Master Rank. At number 20 is Callroth. Now to clear any doubts, this will not include the fight from the Arch-Tempered version in Iceborne, just the siege from the base game. This siege could have done with a lot more flair. Unfortunately, it's no fun at all solo, and even in a group, the first phase is just passively shooting at it with cannon fire before actually getting into the meat of the fight. Really, it's only the unfun fight that drags Culve down this far. It's one of the most majestic Elder Dragons introduced in the 5th generation, and the environment of the siege is absolutely breathtaking. The feeling of treasure and riches permeates the quests involving Callroth. It's just a shame the base game fight is such a chore, otherwise Cole would have scored a lot higher for me. At number 19 is Uragon. Uragon is the linking chain in the Elder's Recess. It rolls between the upper and lower levels looking for ore to chew on. While I haven't fought Uragon very much, it's a lot more interesting than Rathalos, and the explosive skills the monster litters around keeps you on your toes. Unfortunately, it doesn't have much of an impact on the story, and like Doradogama and Levassiath, is completely optional to hunt. However, it's probably the most interesting and intense out of the three, and returning monsters are always a plus. This bumpy boy is still a solid addition to the roster, and while it still falls by the wayside a bit, the fight is a lot more fun than some of the others lower on this list. Number 18 is Paulumu. Paulumu is a mixed bag for me. On one hand, I like its design and the fight, and on the other hand, I find it a bit hard to take seriously. It's a big white balloon bat, but the fight itself isn't frustrating, and the monster has a charm to it, even though I still can't take it seriously. Flash pods are a certain way to down the monster, and it can be satisfying to master the fight, especially with heavier weapons like the switch axe. Overall, it's a fun tier 2 monster, though it falls by the wayside later in the game, until it's replaced by its far more annoying variants, but more on that another day. At number 17 is the Gecko Bat, Pookie. I like this monster. Sure, it's not hard, sure it's ugly, sure there are more fun fights, but Pookie serves as the Giant Cuckoo of World. It's the first big winged wyvern players encounter, and it's a nice intro to poison and using the environment to your advantage. Maybe it's the connection to Giant Cuckoo that makes me more nostalgic for the older games, but the design of the monster and the fight is balanced for newcomers and is a nice difficulty spike after the breezes of Jagras and Kulu Yaku. Pookie also has some of the most vibrant colors of any monster, and even though it isn't the best monster in world, it provides a strange sense of nostalgia for whenever I was a far more fledgling hunter back in the old world. At number 16 is the Tobikadachi, the first thunder element monster players face and a solid challenge. It's a quick-footed fanged wyvern that relies on static electricity to charge up conductive fur on its back to shock its enemies. It's a fun fight and has an interesting attack pattern. It can take some getting used to, but learning the quick fighting style will serve hunters well later in the game. The design is basically a flying squirrel mixed with a snake, and oddly enough it works. The blue color complements its electric nature, and the sound design is interesting and strange. Unfortunately, it gets a far more cancerous variant than Iceborne, though the regular Tobikadachi is a solid monster, and a good addition to the Fanged Wyvern class. Number 15 is Valhazak. People might be surprised that the effluvium-covered Elder Dragon scored this high on the list, but it might be because you haven't experienced the cancer of its Iceborne variant. But enough about that mess. Valhazak is actually a fun fight if you go in prepared. Without a miasma jewel or protection against the effluvium, your health bar will constantly be cut in half. When protected against the miasma, Valhazak becomes a much less annoying monster to deal with. His attacks aren't too fast or devastating like Lunastra, and it's extremely satisfying to master the hunt. Plus the armor is some of the coolest in the entire game. It may not be the most awe-inspiring Elder Dragon, but if properly equipped, it can be one of the more enjoyable ones. At number 14 is the B52 Bomber Basil. This gigantic exploding quest crasher is a monster most of us have a love-hate relationship with. It is an invading monster and can show up in any high-rank quest unannounced, leaving exploding scales and blast blight in its wake. Pretty much the aerial Devil Joe, Basil has wrecked more than a few of my quests before I entered Master Rank. Its design is tanky and intimidating, and has an awesome cry that sounds like a storm siren. It's difficult, but if used properly, it can be used as a help in certain quests, raining down bombs on the monster you're currently hunting. Number 13 is Teostra. The Flaming Elder Dragon is actually the monster I struggled the most with on my initial playthrough of Worlds so long ago. Mainly because I faced it with a fire weapon like an idiot. But enough about that. Teostra, if properly prepped for it, can be an extremely challenging yet fun hunt. It may be a slightly unpopular opinion, but I'll stand by it. It's leaps and bounds less frustrating than Lunastra, and the lion design is royal and demands respect. Teostra requires a lot of forethought when hunting it. Between its powder it can ignite, the fire breath, and the supernova it releases, Teostra can be a difficult challenge to surmount for many new players, but it teaches how to prepare, possibly more so than any of the other monsters. Overall, I like Teostra a lot, even though I can't say I'm the biggest fan of its armor design. Coming in at number 12 is Diablos. Free from the over-the-top fighting style of Black Diablos, regular Diablos can be a fun fight once mastered. It's basically a big bullfight. Timing attacks and dodges are extremely important, and getting the timing off can result in massive damage. Its design is intimidating, and it deserves its spot as the apex of Wildspire Waste. It can be quite an opponent for new hunters, and giving its brutal raw power fighting style, it goes for brute strength rather than elemental or ailment-based damage. The armor is classic, and so is the monster, going all the way back to the first generation, except this time you don't have Apsaros constantly getting in your way. There's really not a lot else to say about Diablos. It's a solid fight and an awesome returning staple for the series. Just make sure to utilize the Superman dive a lot. At number 11 is the King of the Skies, Rathalos. That's right, the poster boy for the entire franchise just barely made it out of the top 10. Rathalos is a monster that holds a lot of nostalgia and memories for all of us, and in World, it's given an awesome entrance and is a genuine threat. From its appearance to its attacks, it's an awesome mid-game monster. The toughest part of the monster is the poisonous claws on its feet, and it builds upon the foundation set by Wrathion. My only complaint against Rathalos is that it stays aloft more often than it stays grounded, which can be frustrating for melee users. It's still not as bad as Azure Rathalos. Rathalos is an awesome monster even still, and brings back a lot of fond memories for veteran hunters. We now come to the top 10, and starting us off is Wrathion. Wrathion and Rathalos are almost identical monsters with a few key differences. Where Rathalos has poisonous claws, Wrathion has a poisonous tail. While Rathalos flies around a lot, Wrathion charges back and forth on the ground. These differences, however, make Wrathion more fun for me. At first, the fight is all about cutting the tail off to limit the poison attack, before moving on to each other part. The fight is a lot about part breaking, similar to Bearoff's fight. Adding on to Rathalos, it can spit 3 fireballs at once when enraged. These little tweaks make a lot of difference, however, and make the Wrathion fight more fun for me personally. At number 9 is the upgrade for the Queen of the Skies, Pink Wrathion. Not much to add on to from what I've already said about normal Wrathion, except that I find this fight more challenging in a good way. Pink Wrathion has more health, does more damage, and can use the triple fireball attack even when not enraged. It's a more offensive and defensive focused fight, with the same part breaking strategy used on regular Wrathion. It's an enjoyable fight, and one that I've always liked. At number 8 is the Titiaku. This flashy boy has saved my butt multiple times in the Coral Highlands. He isn't high on the list for his fight or epic design. The fight is actually kind of boring, and its attacks come off as more desperate than dangerous. It's basically a purple velociraptor with 2 flashing membranes on its head. It uses these flashing membranes to reflect sunlight and stun the player or other monsters. Keyword, other monsters. Titiaku will come through the locale, see another monster, flash it, stun it, and run away. It gives you some time to take advantage of the stun and do some damage, heal, or sharpen your weapon. It's extremely useful, and makes this more of a helper than a danger. Plus its armor doesn't look half bad, though it doesn't really protect you from much. Number 7 is the Legiana. This is probably one of the most beautiful of the new 5th generation monsters. A graceful flying wyvern, Legiana is a challenging fight that requires skillfully timed hits and dodging. The fight is fun, much more so than its hellish variant introducing Iceborne that can fall to the lowest depths of the Rotten Vale. Anyway, Legiana is an ice element monster, and it can send chilling winds from ice crystals that forms on its chest and tail. The apex of the Coral Highlands, it remains airborne a decent amount of the time, and tutorializes dodging aerial attacks for new hunters. The armor doesn't look very cool to me personally, though the monster design itself is beautiful, and it's a memorable fight. Number 6 is Odgaren. Clifford the Big Red Dog is one of my favorite monsters in the world. It's agile, dangerous, scary looking, and can cause bleeding. Its fight is extremely satisfying to master, as timing dodges and counterattacks is extremely important to act against its extremely quick and offensive fighting style. Fortunately, while it attacks with lightning speed, its attacks don't hit too hard. Its design is perfect, similar to a nightmarish cross of a huge lizard and a dog. If Zinogre is the wolf of the New World, Odgaren is the pit bull. It's an effective monster, and one that remains a terrifying presence, even in Master Rank. Number 5 is Bearoff. I've always loved Bearoff. Ever since its introduction in Monster Hunter 3, I was just like, oh wow, this thing looks really cool. And it is. It's the first brute wyvern fought in World, and it's a pretty awesome fight. From the mud traps it lays around to the armored head that bounces attacks, Bearoff is an awesome monster. While not the strongest monster in the game and can be defeated fairly easily, the monster is similar to Diablos in its feeling of raw brute strength. Its primary attacks are using its huge armored head to charge or sideswipe hunters. It's a muscular monster, and though it doesn't use any elemental attacks, it can stun hunters easily before charging into them, which can easily cart new hunters. It might not be that hard of a monster, but its cool factor has always been something I've loved about it for years. At number 4 is Anjanath. I'll admit, I have a soft spot for dinosaur-themed monsters, and Anjanath is one of the most blatant dinosaur-type monsters in the entire series. It's basically a fire-sneezing, feathery Tyrannosaurus, and I love it. While it has the 2 fins on its back and nasal crest, the monster works as a sort of precursor to stronger brute wyverns like Deviljho. It combines immense raw strength with fire element damage, and it's the first major difficulty spike in the game. From its bulldozing move to its huge crushing bite, powerful kicks, and fiery sneeze, this monster is one of those ideas that sounds crazy but actually works. I fought Anjanath more than any other monster in World as of right now, and the feeling of mastery to fight is super satisfying, especially when you remember how terrifying it was when you first faced it. At number 3 is Deviljho, the strongest of the brute wyverns. Deviljho is given proper treatment in World. It eats its own tail if chopped off, brutally uses fanged wyverns as huge flailing weapons in its mouth, and can even attack with dragon breath when caught in a pitfall trap. Deviljho is a deadly force of nature, and from its foreboding theme to its glowing red skin when enraged, to its terrifying primal design, Deviljho is a staple of the series, and is more terrifying in World than ever before. It has some awesome weapons, though their affinity is dismally low, and the fight always has a sense of desperation to it, even when experienced. Like Anjanath, it uses a combination of raw power and elemental dragon attacks, and it's immensely effective. Dragon Blight is a major problem players will face, and taking down this mammoth beast is a feeling to remember. At number 2 is the flagship Elder Dragon, Nergigante. This dragon is just pure awesome. From its intimidating design to its brutal power, Nergigante may not have any elemental attacks like Teostra, but it makes up for this with immense strength and regenerating spikes. With massive horns, spiny tail, and spike-covered back, wings, and arms, the Hedgehog from Hell is easily one of the coolest Elder Dragons in the entire franchise. The fight revolves around managing the monster's spikes, preventing them from hardening and going black, which stops Nergigante from doing a catastrophic diving attack. From the creature design to the sound design to the theme, Nergigante is a terrifying threat, and defeating it is immensely satisfying. It's the one monster I still return to, even in Master Rank, just to relive fighting it for the first time all over again. From the lore to the story significance, Nergigante will always remain as one of my all-time favorite monsters from the entire franchise. I really hope it returns for the 6th generation. And finally, at number 1 is the final boss of the game, XenoJiva. Predictable maybe, but XenoJiva is just such a jaw-dropping spectacle. Its design is just amazingly alien, and it carries this intense aura of mystery and power. The fact that this monster is so powerful despite just being born is insane, and its energy-focused attacks are awe-inspiring. From the cutscenes to the fight itself, XenoJiva is a monster with plenty of lore and story significance, even carrying into Iceborne. The fight is less about dodging and timing and more about dealing as much damage as possible to break its parts. Even using Master Rank materials, it took me nearly 40 minutes to solo take down the Arch-Temper XenoJiva. It's a huge health pool, but the intense fight more than makes up for it. The attacks deal extreme amounts of damage, and it's the perfect high to end the base game on. And there you guys have it. That was my ranking for each major monster in the base game for Monster Hunter World. Be sure to like and subscribe to see my eventual ranking of all the Iceborne monsters. If you guys did enjoy, leave a like, and until next time, I'll see you guys later.